They used to say I walked away from everything, from the business, from the family, from the name. But I didn't walk away. I walked towards something they couldn't see. 7 years later, I returned. Not for a reunion, not for redemption, but because the Department of Defense had sent me back to oversee the one thing my family built and believed I'd never be good enough to understand. The plane landed just after dawn. The air smelled like old wood and asphalt. Birmingham hadn't changed much. Neither had the Leland name. Still printed across buildings, badges, even coffee mugs. Leland Systems. My brother's empire now. My father's legacy. My ghost. I called a cab instead of asking to be picked up. I wasn't there to be welcomed. I was there to work. The driver didn't ask many questions. He dropped me 2 blocks from the old neighborhood just like I asked. I walked the rest of the way. The house looked smaller than I remembered. Same wide porch. Same front steps that always creaked on the third plank. My mother opened the door before I could knock. Her eyes scanned me like I was someone she almost recognized. Then she turned and walked inside. No words, no questions, just distance dressed as routine. I stepped into the hallway. The walls were still lined with photos of Thomas. Football, graduation. The day he met the Secretary of Defense. All framed, all perfect. My name wasn't there. It never had been. Upstairs, my old room was still painted pale blue. The books I left behind sat untouched. My bed was made. A place waiting for someone who stopped coming home. I placed my military-issued duffel on the floor and sat on the edge of the bed. My hands moved without thinking. I opened the bag and pulled out the uniform. Pressed, polished, clean. The rank on the collar shimmered slightly in the morning light. I didn't need to say it out loud. Captain. The patch said Leland, but not for them, for me. Downstairs, I heard the sound of silverware and polite conversation. Olivia, my cousin, was in town. Always brilliant, always composed. She had climbed fast in fintech and spoken phrases designed to impress dinner guests. Thomas would arrive soon, no doubt, in a designer suit with the company logo stitched somewhere discreet. He was everything the family expected. I was what they quietly hoped would disappear. That evening, I took my place at the table. No one asked where I'd been. No one asked what I did. They spoke of projections and board meetings, of Thomas's upcoming product launch. Leland Systems was preparing to unveil Vantis 9, a new AI program for battlefield strategy. Everyone beamed. Everyone believed. I sat silent. They thought I had nothing to say. They didn't know that the entire initiative was about to be reviewed by a DoD oversight committee. And they didn't know that I was leading that committee. Not tomorrow, not next week. Right now. My name was already on the internal documents. My authority already in motion. The code base Thomas had approved. The contracts Dad negotiated. The presentations they rehearsed. Every piece of it would pass through my review, and when the time came, they would realize something they never saw coming. I didn't need to be louder than them. I just needed to be in the right room. And this time, I wasn't just in the room. I was the one holding the pen. Growing up with the Leland name came with expectations. Some were spoken, most weren't. My father, Robert Leland, was the kind of man who believed legacy was something you built with concrete and contracts. He founded Leland Systems in his early 30s, turned a small cybersecurity consultancy into one of the most trusted private contractors for military-grade software. He spoke at conferences. He shook hands with generals. He made deals that changed policy. At home, he treated success like currency. My brother Thomas was the natural heir. Brilliant, polished, fast-moving. He spoke the same language as our father. Systems scale market share. I was different. I was the quiet one, the reader, the observer. I didn't speak unless I had something worth saying. My mother Donna used to tell people I was thoughtful, but in private she often asked why I didn't try harder to fit in. I never knew how to explain that I didn't want to fit in if it meant becoming invisible on someone else's terms. By 16, Thomas was already shadowing Dad in board meetings. I was attending coding camps and submitting essays to defense journals under a pen name. I never told them. I didn't think they'd care. The truth is, I knew early that whatever I did would always be compared to him. So I stopped trying to compete and started building elsewhere. After high school, I followed their plan for me. I enrolled in a top-tier MBA program, got halfway through before I realized I hated every minute of it. The networking felt hollow, the lectures rehearsed, the future already mapped in someone else's handwriting. I dropped out. I still remember the silence at the dinner table when I told them. My father didn't speak for almost an hour. My mother blinked slowly like she was trying to process grief. Thomas said, "Well, that's one way to quit." A week later, I enlisted. It wasn't about rebellion. It wasn't even about honor. It was about choosing something that would let me start from zero where no one knew my last name. The Army didn't care where I went to school. It cared whether I could carry weight-solve problems and make decisions under pressure. That suited me fine. I started in logistics working supply chains in high-conflict zones. Eventually, I moved into cyber operations, then threat analysis. I wasn't loud. I didn't climb through charisma. I climbed by being correct, quietly, consistently. Along the way, I met people who saw past the silence. General Eliza Grant was one of them, a legend in defense circles known for her unshakable sense of judgment and brutal clarity. She didn't ask where I came from. She asked what I saw that others missed. When I answered without flinching, she brought me on as a strategic analyst. Over the next 2 years, we worked together on a series of oversight programs designed to evaluate third-party defense contractors. That was how I came to know about Vantis 9, not through family, not through holiday gossip, through official DoD briefings flagged for high risk due to aggressive timelines and limited documentation transparency. When I saw the contractor name, I didn't react. I simply took the assignment. Leland Systems, my father's company, my brother's domain. The program was ambitious. Fully autonomous tactical decision support system, real-time field analysis, drone-integrated threat response. If it worked, it would change battlefield operations forever. If it failed, it could cost lives. The Department of Defense wasn't interested in family ties. They were interested in certainty. That's why they asked me to lead the review, because I don't flinch. Not under fire, not under pressure, not even under a name that once told me I was nothing. Back home, my family didn't know any of this. As far as they were concerned, I was just visiting, maybe between deployments, maybe still floating from one post to the next. My mother made comments about settling down. My father asked if I had thought about coming back to the business side now that I'd had my military experience. Thomas didn't say much. He didn't have to. He'd already won in their eyes. The golden child, the heir, the future. And me, I had become the quiet disappointment who might finally be realizing the world isn't won with camouflage. What they didn't understand was that I hadn't spent the last 7 years chasing status. I had been building authority, the kind you can't fake, the kind that doesn't need to be announced to be enforced, the kind that walks into a room and changes its shape without ever raising its voice. I wasn't back to argue. I wasn't back to remind them who I was. I was back to do my job, and when the time came, that job would intersect everything they thought they knew about me. That's the thing about building in silence. No one sees it until it's the foundation under their feet. Dinner that night was everything I remembered and nothing I missed. The same long table my father had custom built from reclaimed oak, the same wallpaper peeling just slightly in the corners, the same antique chandelier humming faintly overhead. It was a room designed for tradition, not conversation. My mother had cooked a full Southern spread as if food could repair what silence had allowed to rot. Roast chicken glazed with herbs, buttered corn sweet potatoes, biscuits stacked in a silver basket. It smelled like my childhood, warm, heavy, pretending. My cousin Olivia was there too. She had just flown in from Atlanta, radiant and quick-witted as always, dressed in soft gray, with manicured nails and gentle authority, the kind of woman people listened to before they realized why. She and Thomas talked like equals, trading updates on market shifts, defense contracts, tech pivots. My mother sat beside them, nodding proudly at every mention of FalconNet or product rollout. My father sat at the head carving meat with the same precision he once used to slice through competitors. Me, I was placed at the far end, a guest in the house I once called home. They talked about Thomas's latest milestone. The final integration of Vantis 9 was going into review. He'd presented the latest build to the CTO and Lorna Miles, the new CEO, just last week. Everyone around the table nodded as if they were watching a legacy cement itself in real time. No one looked at me. Olivia, maybe out of decency or curiosity, turned toward me halfway through the meal. "Nora, didn't you used to work in Cyber Command? Something with systems calibration, right?" I nodded. "Defense-grade AI deployment and threat analysis." She smiled. "Sounds intense." I was about to respond when my mother spoke over me. "Nora has always had strong opinions about those things. Haven't you, sweetheart? Especially when she was younger." I reached for my water instead of replying. My father chuckled low under his breath. "Sometimes knowing too much makes it hard to work in teams." Thomas grinned. "Still, I bet if you had stayed in the business path, maybe you'd be sitting on the Vantis board by now." I put down my glass. I didn't leave the business path. I chose a different one, and I don't regret where it's taken me. The room quieted. Olivia looked between us with curiosity, but no one else reacted. My father cleared his throat. "Thomas has earned this. Years of vision, leadership, long hours. What they're building at FalconNet is historic. The way tactical AI will reshape defense operations is beyond anything we imagined even 5 years ago." I nodded slightly. "That's exactly why it needs to be handled with full transparency." My mother furrowed her brow. "What do you mean, transparency? It's all been approved, hasn't it?" I placed my fork down. The Department of Defense has protocols for emerging autonomous tech, especially for systems like Vantis 9. This kind of deployment requires multi-tier oversight before national integration. Thomas leaned back. "We've already submitted everything to compliance. What's your concern?" "Nora?" I looked at him. The threat detection module flagged latency issues in previous iterations. We need to make sure none of those flaws persisted into the final build. My father looked up sharply. How do you know that I met his gaze? "Because I've seen the reports." Olivia blinked. "Wait, are you on the review team?" My voice didn't rise. I kept it even. "I'm the lead systems officer assigned to the external audit. My name is on the primary review documents." The room fell absolutely silent. For the first time, they weren't sure what to say. Thomas straightened his shoulders. "You're reviewing Vantis, you? For DoD." I nodded. "Your last 6 submissions passed through my desk, and they're not finalized yet." My mother looked pale. "You should have told us." I shrugged. "You never asked." My father's hands tightened around his knife. "This feels personal." I shook my head. "It's not. This is professional. But make no mistake, if I find evidence of security flaws or ethical violations, I will pause the project. That's not a threat. That's the job." Thomas's jaw tightened. "This isn't some grudge match, Nora. I'm responsible for 200 engineers. I built this." I stood slowly. "And I'll protect the people who have to live with what you built. Good night." I left the table without waiting for a response. Upstairs, I closed the door to my childhood room and leaned against it. My hands were steady. My chest was not. I had replayed that moment for years in my mind. The moment I would finally be seen, not for what I left behind, but for what I became. But the truth is, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like necessary correction, like reclaiming something I never should have had to explain in the first place. I sat on the bed and unfolded my uniform again. The rank felt heavier that night, not because of duty, but because it had been earned in silence without a single nod from the people who raised me. And yet here I was, wearing it anyway, not to prove anything, but to stand where I had always belonged, even if no one else could see it. FalconNet's headquarters sat like a polished blade in the center of Birmingham's innovation sector, a glass and steel monolith with mirrored windows and biometric checkpoints. It was designed to impress from the first glance. No noise, no clutter. No, just power in architectural form. I arrived just after 0900. No family, no small talk. No one knew I was coming, and that was by design. I wore the standard military uniform for formal oversight. Crisp collar, captain insignia sharp on my shoulders. ID badge from the Department of Defense clipped clean at the chest. At the security desk, the receptionist barely glanced at my face. Her eyes stopped on the badge. The tone shifted immediately. I was scanned through, cleared, and escorted to the 12th floor. No one knew my name yet, but they would. The briefing room was already full. Engineers in suits, project managers reviewing notes, legal counsel from 3 divisions. I walked in quietly and took a seat in the front row. No announcement, no title read out, just a quiet shift in posture from the few who recognized the uniform. Then the presentation began. Thomas stood at the head of the room, flanked by 2 executives and an animated interface running simulations in the background. He wore a tailored navy suit, Falcon Net branding just visible above the pocket. He spoke with clarity, composure, even humor. The crowd leaned in as he described the neural net integration for battlefield scenario parsing. He used phrases like scalable autonomy and adaptive mission logic. I had heard them before. I had written some of them. He did not see me. Not yet. As he transitioned to the threat response tier of Vantis 9, a quiet voice from the corner asked for clarification on encryption fallback rates. It was not mine. It was a defense consultant from Washington who had just arrived. Thomas answered smoothly. That's when the door opened again. A tall woman in a black suit entered without hesitation. Short silver hair, cold eyes, measured steps. It was Lorna Miles, the new CEO of FalconNet. She walked directly to the head of the table, surveyed the room, and then stopped. Her eyes landed on me. She tilted her head slightly, then nodded once. That was all. I stood and walked to her side. The room murmured. A few glanced at each other. Thomas turned toward the commotion. When he saw me standing beside the CEO, he paused mid-sentence. His face drained of expression. Lorna turned to the crowd. For those just joining, allow me to formally acknowledge that Captain Nora Leland will be overseeing today's review on behalf of the Department of Defense. Every test, every architecture protocol, every deployment scenario. Her voice was flat, professional, but it landed like a detonator. Thomas blinked, visibly stunned. He opened his mouth but said nothing. I kept my expression still. We sat. The review began. For the next 3 hours, I asked questions. Pointed. Technical. Not rhetorical. I requested logs. Timeline breakdowns. Internal QA notes from earlier stages. I made no accusations. I simply asked for clarity. That's the thing about oversight. You don't need to raise your voice when the data is already speaking. At the 90-minute mark, we arrived at a junction. Thomas referenced a code protocol approved 2 versions ago. He moved quickly through the slides. I stopped him. Can you specify the audit trail on that code block? Who approved the encryption variant? He looked at me, then at his notes. The room held its breath. I continued. Because the last known draft of that module failed under simulated thermal stress, and the logs you submitted omit that outcome. Silence. Thomas's voice was measured but tense. The version we're using now passed internal. I nodded. That's not what the external logs show. I looked to Lorna. Based on preliminary findings, we'll be recommending a full halt on deployment pending third-party validation. It's not a block, but it's not greenlit either. Lorna nodded once. Understood. We'll comply. Thomas looked like he had been struck. I turned to him. This isn't personal. This is protocol. The meeting adjourned 20 minutes later. No applause, no warm handshakes. Just quiet movement as people gathered their things. I stayed in my seat until the room emptied. Only then did Thomas approach. He stood in front of me, shoulders tense, lips pressed tight. I didn't know. His voice was low. I know. You could have told me. I shouldn't have needed to. He looked away. For a moment, I thought he might say more. He didn't. I gathered my notes and left the room. I walked down the corridor without looking back. Outside, the sky had turned a pale winter blue. Cold. Still. I sat in the back of the vehicle as it pulled away from the building. I didn't speak. Didn't text anyone. Didn't replay what had happened. I just sat with the quiet. Let it settle. Let it remind me what power actually feels like. Not noise, not recognition, but the ability to protect something without having to be seen. That was enough. I didn't go home right after the review. Instead, I stopped at a quiet diner just outside the city. The kind with black and white floor tiles and coffee that tastes like it's been sitting since dawn. I sat in a booth by the window and watched the world move slowly past. No calls, no messages, just stillness. It felt honest. It felt earned. I stirred cream into my coffee and let the silence settle into the corners of my mind. I wasn't proud. I wasn't relieved. I was just present in a way I hadn't been in years. The last time I'd come home, I left feeling erased. This time, I wasn't waiting for anyone to validate my story. I had already written it. That night, I returned to the family house. The porch light was on, the front door unlocked. Inside, the house was quiet. My mother was in the kitchen folding napkins she didn't need. She looked up when I entered. Her eyes were softer than before. Not sad, not proud, just unsure. She didn't speak. Neither did I. Instead, I placed a printed report on the counter. A copy of the preliminary oversight review. She didn't touch it. She just nodded. I went upstairs. The air in my old room was thick with memory. Not regret. Just memory. I sat on the edge of the bed and thought about all the times I had been told to be quieter, easier, more reasonable. I wasn't angry anymore, just tired of shrinking. The next morning, my father found me on the porch. He brought 2 cups of coffee. One black one, just the way I used to take it. He handed it to me without a word and sat down beside me. The silence was heavy, but not hostile. Finally, he spoke. I underestimated you. I sipped the coffee. It was good. He continued. I always thought Thomas was the one to carry the name, the one to stand in front of the room. I didn't think you had the stomach for it. He looked down. I was wrong. I didn't answer, because he wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was offering something quieter. Recognition. After a moment, he asked, Why didn't you tell us? I shrugged. Because it would have sounded like a performance, and I wasn't interested in applause. He nodded. Then he said something I didn't expect. Your grandfather used to say the real power doesn't sit at the front of the room. It sits behind the person who won't budge. Maybe you've got more of him in you than I ever realized. It was the closest thing to a compliment I'd ever gotten from him, and that was enough. Later that day, Thomas called. He didn't ask to meet. He just said he was outside. I found him leaning against his car in the driveway, hands in his pockets. He looked tired, not defeated, just tired. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he looked at me. I didn't know you had come this far. I don't know what I thought. I waited. He ran a hand through his hair. You were right to push back. We skipped steps. I knew we skipped steps. I just thought if I could fix it before anyone noticed. He trailed off. I said nothing. He looked at me. Did you come back for revenge? I shook my head. No. I came back because I knew what this project could be, and I wasn't going to let it fall apart while I stood silent. He nodded. Then he said something that surprised me. I'm glad it was you. If it had been anyone else, I would have fought harder. But I trust you. I didn't smile. But something in me loosened. He reached out a hand. I shook it. Not because I was ready to forget, but because I was done carrying it. A week later, I flew back to D.C. My apartment was small, quiet, mine. On the coffee table sat an unopened letter from Westbridge Academy. I opened it slowly. Inside was an invitation. Would I consider delivering the commencement address for the graduating class of their new cyber warfare unit? I read the line twice, then once more. I wasn't emotional, just steady. This wasn't a stage. It was a return, and I had something to say. The day of the ceremony, I stood behind the podium and looked out at a sea of uniforms, young faces, bright eyes, people still becoming. I cleared my throat. When I was younger, I thought strength came from being noticed. Now I know it comes from refusing to disappear. You will be overlooked. You will be doubted. Speak anyway. Build anyway. That's how we win. The room didn't erupt. It didn't need to. The stillness after was enough. Afterward, one cadet came up to me. She looked maybe 20, nervous, but clear-eyed. Captain Leland, I almost left the program last semester, but then I read what you wrote in the oversight report. I stayed. I smiled. That's what it's for, not recognition, just continuity. Months passed, then seasons, then a year. Thomas and I weren't close, but we weren't strangers. He sent me a message once, just 4 words. You were right. Thank you. That was all. My mother started calling more often, not to ask when I'd settle down, just to talk. About her garden, about Olivia, about the weather. She asked me once if I was proud. I told her I was peaceful. She cried. My father sent me a framed article. It was an op-ed written after the Vantas 9 delay, a rare praise piece about defense accountability. He had circled a line. The future of warfare will not belong to the loudest voice in the room, but to the most disciplined mind behind it. I hung it on the wall, not because I needed proof, but because it was time. Time to stop carrying the past like a wound. Time to walk forward as the person I had built in silence. The world never stopped turning. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was chasing it. I was part of it, present, whole, and still becoming. The seasons kept turning. One fall morning, I found myself walking the long marble corridors of the Pentagon, not in uniform, not on assignment, just visiting. My clearance was still active, my name still meant something, but I no longer clung to those facts like armor. I walked past framed portraits of generals and strategists, faces I used to memorize in training. Now I saw them differently, not as unreachable symbols, but as people, as stories with hidden pages. On a quiet bench near the east wing, I sat for a moment and watched the light slant across the floor. It was the same building, but I was not the same person who once walked its halls with clenched fists and a voice too small to be heard. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was worn from travel. A handwritten note from Olivia. You stopped shrinking. That's all I ever hoped for. I smiled. Olivia had moved to D.C. 6 months ago. We shared a quiet apartment in a brick building overlooking the Potomac. She still worked in finance, still laughed like someone who knew she belonged. One evening over tea, she asked me something unexpected. Do you think we ever really outrun the stories our families write about us? I had to think. No, I said finally. But I think we learn how to write over them. That winter we traveled to Seattle. The sky was gray the whole week, but it didn't feel heavy. It felt clean, like starting fresh. I stood on a pier overlooking the water hands buried in my jacket and thought about the life I used to imagine. Promotions, recognition, proof. But the life I had now was quieter. It didn't scream. It hummed. At the edge of the world, I wasn't trying to be someone anymore. I was just living. Back home, my mother sent me a package. Inside was a photo. It was me standing outside Falcon Net after the review. Uniform on, wind in my hair, captioned in her handwriting, I see you now. She never said those words out loud, but seeing them written felt like enough. My father called one evening just after dinner. No agenda, no reason. He told me about a book he was reading, something about military ethics and AI deployment, said it made him think of me. I told him I was writing something too, a guide for young officers entering oversight roles. Not doctrine, just the things I wish someone had told me. He paused. When it's done, I'd like to read it. That was all. I said okay. A year passed, then another. The world kept moving. Conflicts changed, technologies evolved, but I stayed anchored, not stuck, grounded. I wasn't chasing validation anymore. I was simply doing the work. One step, one decision, one quiet act of integrity at a time. And that was enough. People started calling me by my name, not my rank. I didn't mind. I had built something solid, something that would hold even when titles didn't. When people asked what I did, I said, I ask the questions that keep things honest. That seemed to land. One afternoon, while walking through a local university, I passed by a classroom. Inside, a young professor was lecturing on systems risk and AI. My name came up on a slide. Case study, Leland v. Falconet Protocol Pause. I smiled, not because it was about me, But because the next generation was already learning that silence isn't always strength, that doubt isn't always weakness, that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is speak quietly and not flinch. I didn't go in, I just kept walking. There was nothing left to prove. The road behind me was long, uneven, often invisible, but I had walked it anyway, and now I was still walking, not toward applause, not toward revenge, just forward, toward whatever came next.